Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
Wow, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is February 19th, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time is one of my favorite times of the week, specifically because we have the ability to explore, engage, and share. Today, we are talking about risk and value. It shows up in places and situations outside of our office, outside of our role, anywhere in our life. We tend to look at the positive, not only in life, but in our roles at work. We look at the possibility. And then maybe when we like the possibility, we might look at the risk just a little bit. The thing is, because it's what we're drawn to that possibility. And here's the thing. It's difficult to take time. Time is that precious commodity that takes so much energy, that takes that everything out there is competing for our time. And what we choose to spend our time on is what we're prioritizing. So do we take time to fully understand the risk for the potential value? Do we know then, is it the right value in addition to something that we're excited about? And here's the thing. This also not only happens in relationship to what we're doing in our business, the goals that we're creating, the communication strategies that we are putting into place. It also has to do with our own leadership credibility and our own ability to communicate what we want, our own ability to negotiate. And the scope of that skill is what we're going to be talking about today in program 206, which is titled Recognize Risk and Realize Value. Today, we're talking with Martin Medeiros. He is an author, a speaker, and an attorney. He gives you the next step, the next set of confidence, the next level of skill and knowledge to communicate your needs to the world by using the science of influence, persuasion, and negotiation. I am so glad that you are here today, Martin. How are you?
I'm great, Jess. I really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be on your show, and I'm excited. It's a very important topic. You know, at the end of the day, I think it's all we do. There's a finite things in the world, and how we communicate our needs to the world, whether it's obtaining value or allocating risk, that's what we do. That's what we do in business every day.
It is. It's kind of what we do in life too. I mean, and I'm going to go back a few years, but look at any 3-year-old out there. Right? What are they doing? They're learning to negotiate for what they want. And then we fast forward and our family, the experiences we have, the schools that we go to, the expectation of the communities that we belong to shape and change that. And somehow we lose the element of figuring out what we want and actually going for it.
I've been at this for 25 years, and I've read a lot of stuff and made a lot of mistakes. And what I've learned based on the research and being more successful, even with clients, clients wanted some type of certainty. And typically we've all had it when the answer given to us, you know, what are my chances of getting this deal closed or getting this case settled or litigated to my favor? And the attorney will say, it depends, right? Isn't that frustrating? But now we have science. We have not only really good social science studies that have been replicated, but we have actually at the Internet conference in Lyon, France last year, they had artificial intelligence bots go out and pick out what engages people, what makes people pay attention to you, because that's the greatest thing in the 21st century. And before you negotiate, before you even think you have a negotiation, you have to capture people's attention. And now we know how to do that. And once you have their attention, then you can actually start communicating your needs. Does that make sense?
It does. And so you just briefly described, I think, elements of negotiation. Would you have packaged it differently if I said, what are the elements of negotiation?
You think of, everyone talks about elements. They are elements, but more importantly, there's a system, right? So the difference between a system and, say, elements is how we disaggregate. So 20th century science, what we did was we tried to dissect things, understand the parts, and then we could understand the whole. And in the mid 20th century, we started getting into the systems approach to this science where, yeah, we can deconstruct it, but one thing impacts another. And how do they interrelate? Because you can't really divide them. You can't disaggregate everything. And that's my theory, basically, or my approach is there are three systems to negotiation. And let me give them to you right now. The first system or subsystem, this negotiation itself is a system, I call strategy. Simple enough. These are things we do before the negotiation strategy. Second, tactics. Tactics are things we do at the negotiation. And that's actually the subject of my third book, which is 161 Negotiation Tactics. And what we try to do is think about our responses ahead of time when we're given a prompt, or what are typical things we do. And that's what my research did. I actually polled 60 professional negotiators who identified themselves, hey, we're professional negotiators. We spend more than half our day negotiating, and here's our top 10 things. But I interviewed more people, and that's how I got the extra 150 or so. Is I talked to hostage negotiators, combat veterans, salespeople, attorneys, doctors, people in healthcare, and they use, there's 161, but there's 5 basic groups to those tactics. But what we do in the negotiation is important. And one tactic, I'll give it to you, one of the top 5 here, is silence. Sometimes just not saying anything is a great tactic. And people do that. And Americans are notorious for negotiating against themselves when they feel nervous, when people stop talking and they feel tension and they start negotiating against themselves. That's a tactic. The second system. The third system are operations, or the operational system. And what this system has to do with is things external to the negotiation that impact its trajectory. And let me give you an example. Room layout is one thing external to the negotiation that can impact its trajectory. There's a researcher who does, he's in law enforcement, he interrogates criminals. His name is John Reed. And he has a special way of setting up an interrogation room. I was lecturing to a college student, his class, and the college student said, hey, I was just in this interview and it felt really weird. And on the whiteboard, we diagrammed his panel interview for this job. And it was a John Reed room. It was engineered to create tension so you know how people will act under stress. And, in the law enforcement situation, it's to get a confession. In the interview situation, it's to see if you perform well under a stressful situation. So that's an operational side. So once again, the 3 subsystems to negotiations are strategies, or your strategy, things you do beforehand, tactics, things you do at the negotiation, and operations, things external to the negotiation that can impact its outcome. But also, operations are very broad too. It's like, is it telephone, is it in person? There's a lot of different variables. But those are the high level 3 bullet points of the negotiation approach that I've been teaching for years now.
A long, long time. I know when I was checking up on you and preparing for this interview, I did not catch, elements versus systems. And what I hear in the description of each of the systems, the 3 systems that you talk about, is this concept of each one has its own pushes and pulls. Each one has its own approach, basically based off of who we are as we're showing up and preparing for a negotiation, to go into a situation where we are attempting to communicate what we want and get what we want and give what we want, all of those things. And so I find that fascinating that because I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh, well, the next time I walk into a negotiation or the next time I meet a client for the first time, I could pick one of these to practice, couldn't I?
Absolutely. And right now to your listeners, I'm going to give you how to master each one of those as shorthand. So there's like that, and they're not all equal. Sitting down and doing a plan, having a strategy. Northwestern University researchers there in Illinois say you should spend 80% of your time in a negotiation planning. I have developed 8 elements on how to do a plan, but basically it's sitting down. What's my walk away? When is a bad deal? What's a bad deal, and when is it better to not have a deal? And if you've read Getting to Yes, Fishman already called this the best alternative to negotiated agreement. So knowing my walk away, but knowing their walk away too, and knowing how far I can ask and what are they likely to come back with and what's my response. It's very much like a chess game. You got to think 3 or 4 steps or 5 steps ahead. But that strategy piece is how to win. So you should spend more of your time on that strategy piece, right? And so that's it. The strategy, do a plan. On the tactical side, you can do a lot of things. As I said, I've cataloged 161, and pros probably know them. If you're new, the best thing you can do is ask questions, because ask questions, you actually control the dialogue. If any of your listeners have ever been in a deposition or in front of some type of quiz master, that guy or gal who's asking those questions controls the dialogue. And if someone is trying to pull something over on you tactically and you want to slow down the velocity of the negotiation, ask questions. So I think asking a question tactically when you have to do negotiation, getting more information is the way to handle that. And operationally, you just have to focus on your needs. Remember I said, influence, negotiation, persuasion is how we communicate our needs to the world. And we can get distracted by room layout, body language, micro expressions, telephone versus email, time of day. Maybe we are hungry or something like that, or glucose levels are crashing. But if I focus on my needs and I know them, I'm less likely to be influenced during the negotiation. So once again, strategically, do a plan. Tactically, ask questions. Operationally, focus on your needs. And those are some ways to deal with the 3 systems in a very shorthand. I do a 2-day course on this. So this is, you're getting the bullet points here today, Jess.
This is fantastic. So we've got the highlights. Well, here's what I'm taking away, and I'm listening to you. And I'm really glad you said it, because I say it a lot. And it's when you say something a lot, it's almost like when somebody else says it, I get to learn something, even though it's something that I say. And that is, you said, take 80% of that time and plan. You're thinking ahead of time. You're carving it out. You are looking at the shape of it. And so I'd love to, and I talk about that all the time, with so much time erosion that happens from all the other stuff that captures our attention, knowns and unknowns, interruptions, plan time, tasks, whatever the case may be. I'm curious from my perspective, how do you carve out the time that it takes to create that plan?
First of all, it's money in the bank. If you go on my website, martinmederios.com, I actually have some resources where you can do a very quick, 1-page plan. And I'll give it to you right now. Basically, it's, as I said, number one, what is going on here? Do I have knowledge of the deal? Let's talk about that for a minute. Knowledge means, do I know the subject matter? Have I done this transaction before? Do I know what the risks are? Because if you don't know the risks, you really don't know the rewards, because the risk can be eclipsed by the value, and it's not risk in the abstract. When I get my background is math, so I do analysis for certain people, including law firms. When you're going into court and going into M&A deal, using something called game theory. Okay, game theory has to do with probabilities, outcomes, and payoffs. So probability is a risk measure. What's the risk that deal won't close or I won't prevail in court? The possibilities, what are the options, of course, and what's the payoff if that risk may happen? What's the ultimate payoff? So, for example, if I have a 60% chance of making $100, I can expect $60. So theoretically, anything above $60 would be in the money. That's a very thumbnail sketch of how you use probabilities, payoffs in this dynamic, and that's how you can kind of think about it really quickly at your desk. So having knowledge of the deal, what my real objective, as objective as you can get, data. And if you're in a dispute, the Department of Justice in the United States publishes your percentage of prevailing on a given dispute and what the likely payoff is. Investment banks, you can buy reports from investment banks who say this clause in this deal, most 80% of them have this clause and it's worth this much, and it has these things. For example, I'm buying a company, and ideally you want all the money up front. If you're the seller, if you're the buyer, you want to string it out in case things go sideways. But if I know that they call that the tail on the deal, if my payout for that industry is happening in 6 months, and their opener is a payout that's 18 months. And if I'm the seller, I'm going to want to choke that up to what the industry average is, or, ideally get a check up front. So that's how they try to allocate risk in the terms of how long. And unless you know what the tail is on getting that payout, you're not going to be prepared for that negotiation. That's knowledge. So you have to have knowledge. That's one element in your plan. And that will go a long way. And if you don't have the knowledge, outsource it. You got to hire someone who does. Or if it's too emotional, hire someone who can be an intermediary. A mediator. But if you can't objectively see stuff, talk to an attorney if you have one. This happens in family law. There's a lot of couples there. Hey, I got to split up. It's cool. We're going to divide things as per the statute. It's fine. But that doesn't always happen. People are it's your spouse, it's your kids. It's so emotional. In those cases, you need an intermediary. And there's a lot of collaborative divorce groups now, instead of this adversarial, his attorney, her attorney, and they battle it out in court, and which is a huge, that's very expensive. So if you can,
it's also draining.
Not have the emotion, or get an intermediary if you do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how you prepare for a negotiation. And then those are a few elements.
Okay, so I'm going to say, I hear everything that you're saying, and I'm thinking about everyday stuff, right? So you're talking about big things. We're talking about selling a company. We're talking maybe about negotiating an employment contract. We're talking about, big life changes like divorce or death. We've got all of those that come in, and all of those definitely, we do take time. Sometimes we're learning by the seat of our pants, and the time of learning is also the time of figuring it all out and finding out what we don't know. What about everyday things? What about evaluating an existing service provider that is kind of starting to become maybe too much in our business, right? So I'm thinking about technology here. One of the things that I talk about is that every business is a technology business, period, because we all use technology. And if part of our technology went away, our business would be impacted in some capacity if part of our technology went away. And so when people that I talk to, company owners, executive teams that aren't necessarily a technology company, but they rely on technology to connect to their audiences, to their clients, to provide the service that they're providing, and it's not theirs, right? It's not their proprietary. It's not what they do, but they're using it to help facilitate that process. They forget to think about the technology as part of the way they do business, and how do they even protect that? So if the service provider doubles their rate tomorrow, if they go down and something happens in their organization and they can't do what they said they were going to do according to your contract with them, turns around and it influences and it directly impacts not only the bottom line, perception of customers, now we've got relationship pieces. And so when you're talking about the time, I'm thinking the everyday stuff of, well, what about that? What about that service that we take for granted? And we forget to think about that. And then something happens that turns out to be, it seems catastrophic, but it could have been a little bump in the road along the way. Do you have a strategy for dealing with those types of things? Like, well, let's just be proactive here.
Yeah. So the way, Jess, you're so right. I mean, technology is like the nervous system of your business. I mean, if you don't have your nervous system, you're dead. And I think what we really need to look at is, well, what did nature design for humans? Well, we have redundant systems, right? We have 2 kidneys, we have 2 lungs. And when you're talking about technology, think about what you own and what you basically rent. You can, for example, I may have a great SEO strategy. I may put tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars into that strategy, or 50 or $100, which may be dear to me, and to promote my business. And in a day, that investment can be blown if that algorithm on Facebook or Google has changed. So what's my plan B? What's the thing other than investing? Rather than investing all my money in an SEO strategy that relies on someone else's algorithm, maybe I should start collecting things like an email list. So if you get people to opt in to an email, that's something that you hold that you can take with you. So you should, it's almost like a hedge. So too, I do some work with healthcare providers. The data circuits into those, they have 2. They generally don't have just one data circuit. They have 2 in case it goes down. They have redundant systems. And with your business to manage risk, it's the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if I want to make technology work for me and take risks, one strategy, of course, is redundancy. A second strategy is and you have to do this at the beginning of the agreement if you want to make it affordable. And that's think about, if I'm entering into a deal with a vendor, let's say, I want to think about basically it's a prenuptial agreement. Hey, when it no longer works for us, how is it going to happen? I'm using you're a cloud provider. How do I get my data? Can I periodically download my data? Or is this going to have to, pay one of your consultants at $400 an hour to help me do that? So thinking about the end of the relationship and writing it down, always have written contracts, always, ideally, again, nothing I say here is legal advice, but get an attorney, have them review your contracts, but always get it in writing because people forget. And if there's like an end of service term, how do I migrate off that platform into a new one? Okay. Can I have the data files? Can I periodically back them up? Maybe every morning in case there's a termination. So those things are very important, and you have the most leverage in that transaction, in that relationship at the beginning of the deal, because if it's an afterthought, again, it goes back to our strategy, our plan. Our afterthought is going to be expensive. They'll do it for you. It just may be lower quality and higher expense than you'd want it.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Did I answer your question, Jess?
You actually did.
Kind of go off here.
Yes, you did, Martin. And it made me think of a situation that I encountered about not having a contract. So I was founding a company with another person, and I kept saying, we need this operating agreement. We need this operating agreement. And it never happened. And then things got busy, and we were filling up our pipeline, and we had money coming in. And there was this thing that was nagging me. And when I took the time to go, what is this thing that is nagging me? I've got this, like the little hairs on my neck were always standing up. And I realized, oh, this operating agreement is really important to me. Got it in writing. We had everything signed, everything good. literally 2 weeks later, the other person blew up the company. And we had to give all the money back. We closed the doors. We had to do everything. We took serious losses. And the only reason that, in my opinion, it was able to be amicable is because that operating agreement specified what we would do at the end, provided the end ever showed up. Even though we were in love, even though we were courting each other, we were high on infatuation, we were all over dreaming, we were drooling with all of the possibility. Yet that particular piece, it saved my bacon.
Yeah.
In more ways than one. And so yes, you are answering that question. And so even though we never want to think about the end, especially when we're in that possibility stage, especially when things are going really well. Well, the end doesn't have to be the end, but there can be such a big bump that it might accidentally create an end.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you're like you're the perfect client, because you actually think about things when things are going to be bad. And that's so important. I tell you, we have to think, about when things aren't going well, and you have to go into a deal boldly. Now, I don't mean locking your knees and saying, I'm not going to make any concessions. That's fantasy. What I mean by being bold is you have to think, hey, I'm not going to be afraid that I'm going to step on someone's toes. I'm going to communicate my needs in a persuasive and, calm fashion. And most of the time they will accept those needs. And if I want to think about when this relationship is going to break up, then you have to say it, because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to jinx the deal. Oh, I don't want to be the jerk in the deal because, oh my God, I'm going to make this demand and think about, because we're going to make millions forever. Right? And that's
I've been
not
there.
the world I live in.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So we're going to take a short break, Martin, and I'm just going to share with the audience, #VBB Radio. You are listening to program 206, Recognize Risk and Realize Value. And we will be back right after this.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
I am glad to be speaking with Martin Mederios today, who's authored books, who teaches influence and persuasion, and we've been all over the place, which, by the way, I like, because it's really hard to narrow in and talk about just one piece of recognizing risk and one piece of realizing value, because it's not a straight path. It is a curvy, sometimes messy path that we can influence by the tools we choose to use, which happen to be Martin's systems, as well as our own skills and practicing and being present for them. So, Martin, we have a question that has come in from the audience from Lydia, and she used #VBB Radio, Voice of Bold Business, VBB Radio. And her question is, what happens when we ask questions, but someone else uses the same tactic by asking us questions back to respond to try and get that control away from us?
Oh, that's a great question, because pros when it happens. So one, what I call, the open-ended question, number one tactics, they say, oh, don't negotiate against yourself. When people say, what's your price? The rude response is, I don't know, what's your budget? Right? So,
yes.
And you keep hitting this ping pong ball back and forth. And what you need to do is, it's priming. So there's a book, Robert Cialdini had this, he published this book in like the 80s, Influence. And then he kind of was silent for 30 years, and he published his other one called Persuasion. And he talks about how to enter a transaction. And I've always said the best negotiations happen when the other side agrees and they don't even know they agreed to what your needs are. And that's the key. And when it comes to this question, ping pong, let's call it question ping pong. That's the first time I use the term. So hashtag question ping pong.
Here it is.
Basically what you want to prime them to minimize the risk of that happening. And when you prime someone, you get them to think about things that you're going to ask them to do. And the priming, dynamic is as follows. I'll give you some examples. So I'm at a French restaurant. I let's say I'm in a French restaurant. I want people to order very elegant French food, and I have some other food on the menu that's kind of, American, but the high-end stuff is French. Restaurants will actually play French music in order to steer people towards that higher end food. That's priming when you set the stage. Let's say I'm trying to get someone to buy a data security system. I will prime them by saying, think about that awful call you get at night when there's been a breach and these credit cards were disclosed. Wouldn't you like to sleep deeply every night knowing that the data is secured? And our solution is how that happens. That's a typical way of priming people. You get something, very relaxing, French music, having a deep sleep at night, and you can make that happen. And that's, getting their attention. Once people are kind of in the mood, if you will, then you can start about things that you really want to talk about, and then open a dialogue and not cutting to the chase. So, I negotiate all around the world, and different cultures do different things. And what we're finding is a lot of these other culture things that happen, they work across cultures. For example, small talk, opening up. We can say, hey, I used to live in Salt Lake City or something like that. And then they say, oh, you did? And then they say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm trying to figure out what your 5 top difficulties are in your business, right? It's a great opener, because if one of those problems is something that you offer, then you can try to meet that need. And if not, it's not going to be a good fit. You got to fight to do, live to fight another day on that. So, staging that question, priming that question, reduces the probability that you'll get into this question ping pong. And one thing, this is again, Cialdini talks about anchoring too. So there's 6 things that anchor our attention, and it's hard. We have our devices. We're always distracted. Getting people, and you said it, Jess, you said present in the deal, present in the transaction. To be present, there are 6 things that anchor our attention. The first are unique and different things, right? News. The other things are conflict. The third thing is unfinished work. Fourth, of course, is sex. Fifth, mysterious things. And the 6 are things that have to do with us, ourselves. Mm-hmm. And if I can anchor that and then prime, so likely I'll have a very authentic negotiation goes up. The probability of that goes up. But I have to have those pieces in place rather than, so how much it costs? I don't know. What's your budget? Well, I'm not going to get, that's a rude question. I'm not going to tell you my budget until you tell me the value of what you're offering.
Right.
Yeah. And you look for these little open doors. So you can play that question, ping pong, but eventually there'll be an opening. And it goes, it's the last man standing. It's, I've been in negotiations where people actually fall asleep, late night negotiations. So it's almost like an endurance contest sometimes. So I hope that helped the question asker. If it didn't, let me see. But that whole system is how you get out of those traps with professional negotiators, because they know that the question game can go a long time.
So that's really neat. And that tells me we all must practice asking better questions. And I say practice asking better questions because there's always a way to stretch the right question at the right moment. So there is a better question and we can learn for it to snag it seemingly gracefully or instantaneous only when we're practicing on a regular basis with it.
Timing. Jess, you're right. Timing. Watch stand-up comedy. It's all about timing. You know, Mark Twain said, comedy is tragedy in the past. In other words, things that are tragic right now, in the future, they'll be funny. You know, you may have a bad experience where you had a huge loss.
Yeah.
But you can laugh about it someday, right? And
someday.
and almost in this dialogue of, you know, questioning, there's an opening, there's a timing where people go, and just like a comedian knows when to stop talking and let the laugh happen. Or if, you know, you can see the really experienced ones, they'll cut off something when they know it's not going to work and go to something else, depending on the vibe from the crowd. And when you're in a negotiation, you're kind of in front of your audience, right? Your audience of one or maybe a panel. Right.
You know, so there's a question that has come in from Mark, and I'm going to just toss this out here because there's a kind of correlation, and I think it'll bring your point home answering the question. And so Mark's question is, I often get so invested in my own work that when it's time to negotiate, and I'm going to add, Mark, I'm changing your question. I miss the risk signs in negotiation about my own worth here. So you know what, Mark, I'm just going to restate your question, and I'm going to just throw this one out and say, okay, there are a whole bunch of people out there in the world that are service providers. They are technicians, they are artists, they are craftspeople, and when they go to sell their business, if you will, or when they go to step up to the next organization and attract a job that keeps them, attract them the next step on their career, something that's going to help them out. What happens when they're so invested in their work that they're missing the risk signs and they're leaving value on the table from being so focused on what they've done and what they are doing that they don't actually see the true potential?
Yeah, this is very typical. I call it, you know, among other things, this is negotiating against yourself when you think high functioning people, and I'll give you, we want to do well. We want to get the task done. We want to really hit a home run. Depending on what the level is, you being the grinder may not be your highest value. I'll give you an example. So I speak in front of women's executive groups, right? And one thing, a lot of these amazing women have been, they got to where they are being straight A students. They're, you know, at the C level. They did all the tasks. The biggest step they have to learn is not doing it. It's delegating it and managing it. But how, you know, they grew up by getting a very positive reinforcement by being at the top and really doing the work, when it's a whole other skill, when it's not just doing the actual task. It's, if I want to go to the next value level, it's a different skill. That skill, of course, is management. That skill is delegation. That skill is strategy. That skill is developing relationships at a very high level that influence, persuade, and negotiate. Back to, you know, where we're circling back. And this is just a study, UCal, Berkeley, and University of Pennsylvania. They said the number one skill for people at the top of their game in business is negotiation. And why that's important is, first, you have to notice what you're worth, what your deal is. For example, if I'm just doing a task and I'm the best at that task, you have to be present in your own self and say, the market will only pay so much for this task. If I want to add more value, what is the next step? what's the other thing that I can add value? Okay, I'm say a technician. Maybe the next step is to actually, design, a network technician, for example. Maybe the next step is to design a really efficient, redundant network that stays up when things can happen elsewhere, or that can recover quicker. And that's a step into the strategic realm, not just crawling under tables and wire closets, but it's the next step. So, and this doesn't mean everyone has to be, doing, hey, you should be where you get the most joy, right? And if that's not where you are, if you're ambitious, you want to go somewhere else, you have to think of what's the value on that next step up, and am I delivering that value? And it has to do with knowledge. That's the number one step in our strategy. We have to know what will the market bear, or what's unique. Remember, capturing attention, unique. What's so unique about me? What's the objective data that's unique about me to get that maximum return on the services I provide to my customers and clients? Does that make sense? I hope that answered Mark's question.
I hope it did too, since I totally hijacked it.
But yeah,
that's so funny. So Mark, you're listening, try and get it back in. If we got too far off base for you between my restatement, or you would like to hear more about part of Martin's answer. Now, I have another one. Here's another one. This is from Emily. All right. Emily actually sent us an email, radio@reddirection.com. She's asking, what should we look for in risk that will guide us to a decision? Is it recognizing risk for being a risk, or for an actual opportunity?
Well, that's a interesting question, because I would say probability, outcome, payoff. What's the probability of the event, the risky thing happen, and what's the payoff? It's okay to take a bigger risk if the payoff is greater. But if the payoff isn't there, or if it's a break even, you may have a difficulty accepting that loss, because, and this is something they've done psychologically in some psychological tests, that we value risks or losses higher than gains. In other words, if I gave you $1 and said, you can either put this $1 up and gain another $1, so you have $2, or you can take this $1 and avoid losing $1, most people will spend it on loss avoidance, not value gain. And that guides a lot of human behavior. And something too, and I was just thinking, this may be what Mark's talking about. If you hold an asset, we generally overvalue when we possess something than what the market will bear. And they did this study, I think it was, I forgot where they did it, but they basically gave students mugs. The ones who held the mugs already wouldn't part with that mug for twice what they purchased it for. In other words, they would only spend $1 on the mug, but to give it up in the negotiation, they wanted $2, which is it's a known fact. Robert Thaler is a Nobel laureate who did some of this research on when you hold something, you value it more than it actually is. And the proof, of course, is in the market on what its true value is. And risks are part of the market allocating, but you have to know that loss avoidance is valued more than value gain. Is that rational? I don't know. That's just what the data says.
Well, I'm going to go back to we learn this stuff early. That happens with third graders and fourth graders when you give them cookies. Look at this cookie.
Oh, I like this. I want to hear this story, Jess.
You want to hear the story? Yeah, they've done studies with these kids, and they'll put them in a room and they'll say, if you can sit and look at this cookie for, I don't know, I'm totally making up the details of this, but it'll get the point across. For X amount of time, you can have a second cookie. And some of the kids, there's a little bit of executive function in here. And some of the kids, very few of them, would actually be able to sit for the whole period of X time to get that second cookie for that bigger payoff. Most of them might have made it, a couple of minutes or maybe even half the time. Some of them made it 3/4 of the time. But in the end, they all ate the first cookie and they were like, I want this cookie so bad, I don't care about the second cookie. And so it's interesting that, you're talking about this with dollars and we're hearing then, this is happening with adults. We know that it's happening with kids. And so we're learning these things at early ages. And so it sounds to me like isn't it another skill of practice then? This is something else we can practice. Can we really wait for the payoff that we want? Provided the market can bear it, provided somebody sees value in it, and the other things that go into making a deal happen.
There's a lot of wisdom in that. The old quip I say is bad ideas tend to come at you fast, where there's some urgency. Oh my God, this sounds really good. It's coming at me fast. Taking the time to do a little bit of planning to see, hey, is this a good deal is critical. So delaying that gratification, right? Yeah, it looks like a big cookie in front of you, but maybe if you hold off a little, you can get 2 of them. So that's really what you said is just so loaded. I don't know where to begin, but
we can have a whole show on $1 or $2, 1 cookie or 2 cookies. I think.
Yeah.
And here we are in the last few minutes. So, but that, yes. So as you were speaking, I was like, oh, this starts in us really early. And, how do we delay our instant gratification, which is a whole other thing that I know when it comes to persuasion and priming and negotiation that can work to our advantage when we've done our planning ahead, when we've done 80% of the work before we ever walk into the situation to use those tactics and to make sure that we are at least aware of what our external factors are, the operational part of that you were talking about in the 3 systems at the beginning. So you used the word bold earlier in the show, and I know you're calling in, and so you could not see me dancing with happiness, but I was like, look at that. It showed up. This is so great.
Yeah.
So being the voice.
And that was just random. I wasn't primed for that at all. It's just what it is.
I know, right? So what makes it bold to take a look at your situation, your company, your industry, what you're trying to get from the outside?
Entrepreneurs, I love you. I've worked with you for decades, but always have a grip on reality. That does not mean dream big. That does not mean pay attention to people who are your detractors. Don't pay attention to your detractors. You can figure it out. Can it be done? Will the market bear it? Is it really a need and not a want? Because that's why my little, my little tagline there, we communicate our needs to the world via persuasion, influence, and negotiation. Those are needs, not wants. Wants are very, as I think of it, are very, visceral. They're things that, I really want that. It's very emotional. Needs are things that you need to get that market share, to get that business launched, to, have joy, because things you want are not always going to get you where you need to be. What do I need? Say, you're going for funding. Well, if it's a bank, there are certain things I need. I may need shareholders with a certain credit rating in order to get that loan. I may, if, I'm going for venture money or something, I may need to have a certain market share for, my state or my region. So what do you need to be successful? Not what you think you want. So you have to figure out what your goal is and what your needs are to get to that goal. And always, really do be bold, because people will always tell you you can't do it. People will always say that. My dad always said, people will tell you you can't do it, but you have to do it anyway, because that's how the world runs.
You heard it here. This is the voice of Bold Business Radio. Recognize risk and realize value, program 206. All of Martin's books will be linked on the show notes page, which can be found at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P206. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 206. You've listened, you've watched, and we are live streaming here on this Tuesday. So rate this program where you're watching, on YouTube or Facebook. Later on, when you're catching this as you are commuting or walking or eating your lunch, whatever you might be doing to multitask and make the most of your learning and continued development as a leader that gets results, that will take and understand what that bold action looks like. You're listening on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and many others. So tell us, what did you think? What did you take away from what Martin shared today? I mean, my mind is reeling. I really want this conversation to go on for another hour at least. So because it comes down to our communication, our negotiation, our intent, what we've decided we need, and what we're willing to do to go after that need to move forward. And so I would like to leave you, audience, with this question. How do you recognize risk and realize the value?
The voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. Use hashtag BBBRadio or email us at radio@reddirection.com to ask questions and share your experiences. Add your voice to the conversation. Together, we define what being an effective leader means today. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.